Have you ever failed before and wanted to change? If you answer yes to this question, this episode, this live stream, this video is just for you. Today, we're going to talk about how your podcast can change because you are the one that's changing. And so when you change, you learn how to grow. And as you're growing, you become the person that you are looking to grow into. So welcome to another episode of Phase Knowledge Podcast. I'm your host, Terryl Humphrey, and over the last half a decade, I produced over 893 podcast episodes. And throughout this journey, I've been bringing you along the journey to document the process, document the lessons, document the growth, document everything that I have experienced to show you what's working, what's not working, and what's possible for yourself. Make sure you got your pen. Get your notebook because today we are talking about why your podcast can change and how it's changing with you. So first thing first, point number one, make sure you got your notes because if you new to the channel, new to the podcast, I'm on, and if you're on a video, I'm literally on. It's not a new camera, but it's a new setup. At this moment, I'm not sure how to fix it, which is absolutely okay. Nonetheless, change comes with understanding what you're doing. I can't figure everything out in one day, but I can figure it out as I start to change. So point number one let me go ahead and share the screen. Point number one, your podcast can change. And point number one is that you have to force change. And the reason why I say you have to force change is because change doesn't happen until you make it happen. When I was in Little Rock, Arkansas, and I was working at Walmart, when I came onto the floor one day, I was putting up produce, I was putting up fruits and vegetables, stacking it. It was 4 o'clock in the morning. It was 4 o'clock in the morning, and barely anybody was there in Walmart. And then as I was stocking the shelves, I took a step back and just looked around. And I was like, man, I don't see my life like this for the next 20 years. I don't see myself working at Walmart for the next 20 years of my life. Walmart is a phenomenal company. Nonetheless, it was something that I saw within myself. I knew I wanted to change, but if I wanted to change, something had to change in me. And so when I forced the change, this is what I did. I knew I wanted something different, but I didn't know what different looked like. I didn't know what different look like. So in other words, I was confused on what I was going to do. So one day my coworker came to me and she was like that she had spoke to a Marine Corps recruiter. I was like, for real? She was like, yeah, he cool, talked to me, answered all the questions. I was like, all right, cool. Can I talk to him? I talked to him, excuse me, and we sat down, had a conversation, had a meeting, and then it started there. You see, that change doesn't happen if I don't go out my way to find the change. Change doesn't happen if I don't go out my way to force something different. Change doesn't happen if I'm not focusing on growing my podcast. You see, there's so many different things that I started to pay attention to. It wasn't the fact that I was just working at Walmart. It was more so I wanted more for myself. More comes from change. I wanted more, but I didn't know what more was. So I knew I needed to see something different. I just didn't know what different was. When I spoke to the Marine Corps recruiter, I spoke with him. I saw something different. I saw something different because it was something that I wasn't used to. It wasn't something that it was normal to me. Changing your podcast means that you have to upgrade when you coming out, how you interview, how you have conversations, how you put yourself out there. It's not the fact how you put yourself out there. It's more so when you put yourself out there, are you putting yourself out there in a strategic manner? Hold on. Are you putting yourself out there in a strategic manner? You see, your podcast, everybody, there's over 4.5 million podcasts out there. Everybody can have a podcast because it doesn't take that much to have one, right? But everybody can make a difference. Everybody can make an impact. Everybody are not able to build their audience. Excuse me. You see, it's not just about podcasting. It's literally about putting yourself out there in a way that will help others with a problem that you already solved. When I start to understand more about business, the podcast production became more than just a podcast production. It literally became a way to connect with others. It literally became a way to build relationships. It literally became a way to start growing a business. Hold on. This right here, the podcast, let's say this is the podcast. This is Phase Knowledge Podcast. And this right here, right underneath it, consists of growth, change, impact. Hold on. Impact. If I want to make an impact, I got to make the impact with myself. And then when I start with myself, I start to help others the way I help myself. In business, when you help yourself first, you learn how to help others. It was so challenging for me because when I got into business a half a decade ago, I didn't even know I was in business. What I did know was that I just wanted to help others. I just wanted to encourage others. I just wanted to inspire others. You see, that only comes from me learning how to not only put myself out there, in other words, how to market myself, in other words, how to sell myself, in other words, how to communicate with myself. When I was in the Marine Corps, we're going to do a moment of silence for all the troops that's over there during the war. Thank you. So by me being proud service member, there's so many different things that I didn't recognize. Excuse me. And there was a book called Selling Yourself. And when I was reading this book, I'm thinking in my mind, like the title itself, it was crazy. It literally was called Selling Yourself. And I didn't even know that book was related to sales. I didn't know that book was related to like putting yourself out there. I didn't even recognize how much information that consisted of. So in the book, it talks about that you have to be confident as you show up. Sales is a part of business. Marketing is a part of business. Finance is a part of business. But I'll tell you this, to make change, you have to change what you're learning. You have to change what you're doing. You have to change your environment. I'm originally from Little Rock, Arkansas, and then I got stationed in San Diego, California. But before I got stationed in San Diego, California, I literally went to Missouri, and then I went back to California, and then I went to all these. I wasn't even all. I went to Oklahoma. I went to Oklahoma twice, the San Diego twice, Texas, and like all the states. I didn't go out the country. Nonetheless, what I'm getting to is that you have to force the change. In the service, they force you to change. They say you have to learn how to embrace the suck. In other words, embrace. Hold on, let me rewrite this. Embrace the uncertainty. When you change your podcast, when you enhance your podcast, when you improve your podcast, that uncertainty is there. You're not sure if it's going to work. When I start changing my podcast, the Phase Knowledge Podcast, it went from just me having a conversation, me just making videos by myself, to me going out to public and having interviews with others, to me putting myself out there to having more conversations, and then me putting myself out there to communicate with more different. You see, it's not the fact that the change happened because I didn't do anything. No. The change happened because I forced the change. If I want to see change, I have to be the one to go out there and search for it. Change means that you are embracing the uncertainty, but you're learning how to be sure of yourself. You see, your podcast is a way to connect with others. My podcast was a way to connect with others because we help others turn setbacks into success. A lot of people talk about success, but what about the failures? What about the doubt? What about the insecurity? What about is this gonna work? What about the second guessing? You see, I failed so many different times, and I thought I was the only failure. I wasn't the only failure. What's going on, Ed? Oh man, your name look familiar, bro. It wasn't the fact that I was a failure. I just literally thought I was the only one failing that was around me. Then when I start having these conversations with other leaders, other executives, other entrepreneurs, they have failed as well. But many times in life, I'm thinking people are just successful. I was thinking people went through no trials and error. I was the only one that had to fail. I was the only one that had to go through certain things. You see, when I became sure of the podcast and the value that it's bringing, it's more than just a conversation. It's literally like, hey, this is how you transform. Transforming comes from change. I like that movie, Yo Legend. Are you looking for a video editor? Not at this moment though. I can definitely reach out to you though. When I started to literally put myself out there, it was like, all right, cool. There's a movie, Transformers. And I like this movie so much because they go from being a car. Hold on, that's not a car. Let me try this again. They go from being a car let's say this is a car, to being a person. They literally transform into not a person, to a body. They go from a car to a body. But I tell you this, it wasn't the fact that they decided to transform. It's just that they forced to transform. You see, if the car was going to fight a villain, the villain has the advantage because the car only has wheels, only has a steering wheel. But if the villain was to meet another person who can match their energy, you see, now the fight becomes fair because they forced the change. When you force the change, you learn how to transform. You're learning how to transform, and when you transform, you learning how to change. So point number two that we're going to talk about is that your podcast, hold on. Point number two, look at your format. Every podcast has a format. And in other words, every podcast has a way to communicate with the guests, with the audience, with anybody. There's a format. There's a formula. In other words, there's a formula of a conversation. There's a formula of a podcast. Failure's knowledge formula is turning setbacks into success. So what does that mean? We talk about the failures, we talk about the journey, we talk about the lessons that you have gained from that. You see, it's not the fact that the format is not good. It's more so that the formula had to be improved consistently. If I want to change my podcast, I have to be the one to improve my podcast. You see, Failure's Knowledge Podcast is more than just a conversation. When we help real estate developers build their brand through podcasting, we're not just bringing a camera in front of your face so you can talk. Nah. We are showing your expertise in the industry that you are in, so that way you can build connection with your experience, your journey, your lessons, your failures, and people start to connect with you. You see, that formula is connection. When you make connection, you are learning to change. When you force change, your podcast is making an impact. Hold on. You see, it took me a while to understand how to make an impact with Failure's Knowledge Podcast. It's literally like, man, if I understand what I'm doing, how to do it more consistently, then eventually I'll be able to help more people. But before I get to the eventually part, I have to learn how to connect. Connecting is learning to meet people where they are at. I took a marketing class, and it says if you're going to be a marketer, you have to learn how to communicate in a language where people can understand. So if I'm speaking in English and I'm talking to someone who speaks Spanish, the language barrier is there. Like you don't understand what I'm saying because your first language is Spanish. Whereas if I learn how to speak Spanish and I come to you and speak your language, I'm meeting you where you are at. In podcasting, you have to meet your guests. You have to meet your audience where they are at. What value are you bringing? How are you helping them? How are you literally putting yourself out there so that way they can literally say, man, this person understands me. You see, it's not just about a camera being in front of you for your podcast. You see, the podcast production is literally more than just a production. It's literally putting yourself out there, but it's us helping you make that connection. It's us helping you build that audience base. You see, people do business with people who they know, like, and trust. What's going on, man? I appreciate y'all for joining in. People do business with people who they know, like, and trust. Shout out to Action Zone. Shout out to the what is called Boss Media. You see, people got to learn how to trust you to like you. But in order for people to trust you, you gotta be okay with showing up as yourself. You talk about your experience, you talk about your failures, and you build that relationship. Say, hey, if I can do it, you can do it too. But here's how I did it. A lot of people read from the book, but from the people who read from their experience / failures are the ones who connect. Ones who connect. You see, if it was easy, everybody would be connecting. You see, excuse me. Hold on. Appreciate all the love and support, man. Okay, you can follow back if need. We can work together later. All right, appreciate it, Ed. When you fail, you're not a failure. When you fail, you literally are learning. And I thought I was a failure my whole entire life because I failed so many different times. I failed my ASVAB to get into the military multiple different times. I failed the driving test, the rent test multiple different times. I failed a classes multiple different times. I failed different. I tore my ACL. You see, it's not the fact that I tore my ACL that made me a failure. I just had to go through the process of healing. When you force change, your podcast becomes more impactful. It's not the fact that you're doing the same thing that everybody else is doing. It's more so you're doing everything that everyone is not doing. And when I start to understand, I'm like, man, what makes me different? What's my competitive advantage? And competitive advantage is what makes you stand out. What makes me stand out is that we talk about the failures. And I'm thinking, man, I thought everybody talked about it. But no. Excuse me. What I started to learn is that people only talk about the success. But what about when you didn't have everything figured out? What about when you didn't know what you were doing? You see, it's not the fact that you are successful. It's more so that you have failed at something, but you're not talking about it. Hold on, I saw somebody say, you failed the ASVAB? Yeah, 3 times, bro. You see, you can't understand growth if you haven't experienced anything. Your podcast is the experience that helps others learn that it's possible. Point number three is this. Determine that it's possible. And I'll tell you this, just to recap, first 2 points. First point number 1 was you have to force change. Change ain't gonna come to you if you ain't forcing that change. Point number 2 was you have to look at your format. Every podcast has a format, has a formula, and the way that they communicate. Last thing that we're gonna talk about is determine that it's possible. What is it? It's equals growth. Let's see if we're right. Growth. Hold on. It is growth. Change doesn't happen if you don't force that change. You see, if I have a seed, right? I got a seed. This right here, let's just say this is a seed. And if I was to plant it in the dirt, right? Now the seed is right here, right? There's going to be some things that happens underneath the dirt. This right here is called dirt. Dirt. There's going to be some things that happens that a lot of people don't see. These right here is called roots. In other words, foundation. So then as the roots is growing underneath the ground, as it's growing underneath the ground, what happens is that you don't see one day it will come up. One day there will be a little leaf that comes from the seed that was planted. But first, before it comes up, you have to be okay with planting a seed when you don't see nothing happening. You gotta be okay with nothing happening at first. In other words, just because it's not happening today doesn't mean it will not happen. What it means is that as you are growing, as you are learning, as you are evolving your podcast becomes a stepping stone of literally helping you grow. But you have to grow with a foundation behind you. You see, underneath you is where you understand what you're doing. Failures on this podcast has been growing with me because now I understand more about business, understand more about marketing, understand more about sales. You see, I've been documenting the process and I've been bringing you along a journey to say what's possible, what's not possible, what's working for me, what's not working for me. I failed publicly. In fact, I'm on my 7th 90-day challenge to grow a podcast production business. That's 7 times. That's one. Hold on. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm on my 7th attempt of a 90-day challenge. But why am I saying this? You see, challenge 1 through 6 was me learning what I was doing, was me understanding the business I was in, was me understanding the problem that I was solving, was me understanding the solution that I had. You see, 1 through 6 was the learning curve. The first challenge, I went all the way up to 90 days, but I only made $217, but I invest back into the business, I was around $10 and some change. Reason why I'm saying this is because of this. You can't succeed without I messed that one up. Hold on, let me try that again. You can't succeed without failure. You gotta be okay with failure because this failure is going to teach you something. This failure is going to prepare you for something. This failure is going to push you. This failure is going to help you grow. This failure is going to force change. 7 attempts. 7 attempts. Let's say 7 tries. And on my 7th attempt, I finally understand the business that I'm building. The business that I'm building, I've been trying to gain the clarity on how to go about building it. You see, there's a process behind everything. You can't skip the process, but what can happen is that you can go through the process. Because as you are growing through the process, the things is growing underneath. You're building your foundation. You're building your education. You're building your skills. You're building the know-how. You're building the process. You're building the steps. You see, growth happens when you force it to happen. Growth happens when you force it to happen. Failure is knowledge is more than just a podcast. It's literally a way of life. I was talking to somebody and they said something that was like, well, that's what it takes. My wife and I went to this conference. It was called Scale Your Ads, and it was a phenomenal conference. Nonetheless, somebody asked the question like, what did you do before this? And he mapped it out. He mapped it out. He got on the board and start drawing. When he started to draw, he mapped out his success. In other words, he mapped his failures. Because when you succeed, you gotta learn how to fail. Shout out to ET. When you want to breathe, hold on, what did it say? When you want to succeed as bad as you want to breathe, then you will be successful. In my definition, in my words, it says you have to be okay with failure. Because if you're not okay with failure, you can't grow. It doesn't happen easy. What happens is that you learn how to make it work for you. When you force change, you are learning how to improve your podcast. You are learning how to be a better storyteller. You are learning how to build a better connection. You are learning how to connect with those. You see, many people are going to watch, but many people won't say that you actually helped me. It's up to me to change. It's up to me to grow. It's up to me to understand business. Because now, as I start to build that connection builds a business. Connection builds a business. But before your business, my business is built, let me tell you something. I had to fail. Hold on. I had to fail. Hold on. I had to fail more. Hold on. I had to fail even more. Hold on. I had to fail more than even, and I had to fail again. Failure is knowledge, because you never know what lesson you're going to learn. If you're a real estate developer who's struggling to build your brand through podcasting, shoot us a message, because we're not just talking about building your brand. No. We're talking about building a connection where people will be more inspired to do more business with you. Just to recap everything that we talked about today, this is what we talked about. Point number 1 is this. You have to force change. Change ain't gonna come. Sam could say change is gonna come. Change ain't gonna come if you don't force it to come. Point number 2 that we talked about is that you have to look at your format. Every podcast, every conversation, every episode has a formula. You have to look at your format to see if you're making a difference. And the last point that we talked about was that you have to determine that it's possible. What is it? Growth. You have to determine that growth is possible. When you determine this, your podcast will grow, change, and evolve. Lastly, don't be afraid to fail, because you never know what that failure is going to teach you, because failure is knowledge. I appreciate y'all. Hit that follow, hit that subscribe if you're looking to join a community. If you're in the process of growing something, a business, a podcast, content creation, hit that follow button, hit that subscribe, because one thing that I've learned is that we can't do it by ourselves. But if we join other people and get inspired by other people, then eventually we will be able to do it. Hit that follow, hit that subscribe. I appreciate y'all. That was good. That was real good. Yeah, that was tough. That was tough. Oh, I'm still alive. I was about to unplug everything.